All righty. Good evening. Today is Friday, December 5th, and we are back to you once again with another Poe reading. If you're tuning in for the first time, this is something I do every Friday. If you're here to be a hater because I made part of the title Abolish ICE, read Poe instead, I understand. Welcome. We do this every Friday where we read Edgar Poe, and what we are doing is we are continuing a process that we started a couple Fridays ago of reading through the murders in the Rue Morgue. But always before we actually begin the actual reading of the story, I always begin with a briefing as to what exactly is going on, not just with the campaign, but also in the world generally. And I tend to pull these briefings from what I hear on the International Peace Coalition calls that happen every Friday. Um, uh, basically, this today we had Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Ray McGovern and a couple of other people whose names are escaping me at the moment right now. But Helga Zepp-LaRouche started by referencing the fact that you have some important things happening in Russia and India. Now, part of the reason I talk about other countries and part of the other world is because we're not limited here just to what's going on here in the United States, because I don't see myself as somebody who's only limited to, arbitrary congressional lines, arbitrary zip codes, arbitrary borders that, define, who I should care about and who I should not. If you're a United States citizen, you are you are somebody who has to have a world view and a world perspective, something that has been robbed of you. You're supposed to not care about what's going on in the world, but quite frankly, it's very possible that you might be one of the many Americans right now that are depressed because of what's going on in our country, not realizing that the United States is only about 350 million people. When you're talking about a country the size of India, which has over 1 billion people, that's about 3 to 4 times the population of the United States. Then you start talking about China, that's 1.3 billion people right there. You start talking about Russia, that continent is giant, right? And so it's a very big deal when almost 1/8 of the world, represented by India, is meeting with Putin and they are having amiable conversations and relations, especially when there have been efforts to try and dissuade these countries from working with each other. And so Helga Zepp-LaRouche gave a brilliant analysis on, the sort of inner workings about what's going on altogether, um, the general process happening uh, 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 worldwide right now. And of course, continuing to push through her idea of this coincidence of opposites through this Nicholas of Cusa approach, where two seeming distinct parties that should not be, talking with each other or agreeing with each other or anything can actually come together for a resolution, a higher resolution. And that's kind of where the world is in that direction right now. And you may not know that. And I would, first of all, just urge you to go and tune into the IPC. These are always recorded. And after you're done here, you can go and watch them at the Schiller Institute. Ray McGovern expressed similar sentiments and he expressed hope. One of the things that he kept stressing was the fact that Trump is emphatic that he wants to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, if that's the case, then he should continue these productive conversations to end the war in Ukraine and to actually try to seek peace in different places, and to continue to be open-minded and to continue to be open to the prospects that maybe we can solve these things through engineering, which, brings me to another part of the IPC. There was a challenge that was put out to create a video. This was by Kirill Dmitriev, that's right, who, asked people in a competition who can make the best video to sort of talk about the relationship between between the United States and Russia and why we need a Bering Strait tunnel. And it's this video, I won't play it here, but where you have starts with Thomas Edison talking to Dmitry Mendeleev, and it cuts to today as how this tunnel could be one of peace, connecting Alaska to Russia, because only 40 miles separate the US from Russia. A lot of people don't know that. So it could be a very big deal. And this could also be the solution to actually ending the war in Ukraine. regardless, yeah. So I would just urge you to check out the IPC. This is something that's available every Friday. Today's was particularly excellent. I would ask you to check that out. Now, in terms of campaign stuff, we put out 3 videos. Actually, we put one out earlier this week with our proposition for a cross Bronx train, which a lot of you really liked, where we talked about an east to west train line. And uh, uh, not only that, uh, uh, sorry, that a lot of people like the fact that I presented a project of an east to west train line, a cross Bronx train, basically, especially now that there's a lot of discussions about trains, period. But more importantly, because this is an ugly piece of infrastructure that had divided a lot of people in the Bronx and tore down a lot of houses, the Cross Bronx Expressway. If you're a native New Yorker, you know what I'm talking about. Um, and so I was surprised to see that a lot of you really liked the idea. It showed up in a couple different subreddits. It was being discussed. A lot of people had their own sort of imaginative propositions saying where the specific stops could be, how far down it would go, if it would be feasible. This was the sort of big feedback that I got, which was this big feedback of like, well, it seems like a good idea, but it's going to take years to build, or it's something that we're going to have to compromise, or it's something that won't be seen until my great grandkids are, actually, when they're like great grandkids are in retirement age or something, because that's just how long it takes New York City to build stuff. But actually, not all that different from this sort of Bering Strait tunnel. It's not a matter of technical prowess, but more a matter of political will. We know that the Chinese can actually build stuff in record pace. They break records all the time. So we know that the technology to get these things built is there. So it's just a matter of deciding that you want to do it. So actually, I think I will play this video. Here we go. Hopefully people will be able to hear this. So let's see here. Go here.
Hello, my dear friend. I've been sailing for a whole month to get here. I'm very tired. We need to do something about it.
As we know, time is also distance, only measured by speed. That means it can be reduced by changing the medium of movement itself.
You mean, instead of overtaking the ship, we should eliminate the ocean?
Look, Thomas, it's only 100 kilometers here. The sea separates us.
Shall we go under the sea? An interesting idea, Dmitry Ivanovich, but not realistic.
There was a time the light bulb seemed to be a magic thing.
150 years have passed. The dreams of engineers have become blueprints. Blueprints have become roads, and roads have become bridges between people. Sometimes a dream is not a fantasy. It just takes time for it to become reality.
So that's the So that's the video. I apologize for the AI. I actually really detest stuff that's created with AI, but it does show a good sentiment of people who want to see peace between these two countries, and I can't stop that. Excuse me, I can't stop the creative endeavors or people who put the stuff in AI to make it, but I think that it shows a good faith spirit of saying, hey, and there's a quote that was presented to me recently from the former governor of Alaska, who said the things that we can do, we should replace the things that are done with blood with sweat. You know, that we can actually solve the problems of the world today through engineering. You know, that to me is a very inspiring and hopeful message. And I think we can do that whether it's the Bering Strait Tunnel or a cross Bronx train, or even better, a network of high-speed rail. Isn't it better to train 10,000 engineers rather than 10,000 soldiers to go and mindlessly kill whoever they're told to kill? Isn't that a better productive use of our time? Regardless, that is my briefing, and I am now going to bring in Dennis Speed. Dennis, are you there with us?
Yeah, can you hear me, Jose?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, people, I cannot use my camera this week, but we'll be going right to the reading in any case, and that'll be primarily being done by people right there live in the office. I just want to say a few things concerning what it is we're involved in and remind people of some things. So Edgar Poe was born in 1809. He died assassinated most likely in 1849. He is generally known and sometimes celebrated as an author, but is.
Did we lose you, Dennis? Uh-oh. I think we may have. There we go. Can you hear us now, Dennis?
Hello, I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, can you hear us, Dennis? He probably got a phone call in the middle, so maybe someone should text him to restart the stream or to just rejoin. Dennis, are you there? Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have. Okay, there he is. Okay.
Okay, are you able to?
Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Okay, fine. So let me start again. Born in 1809, died 1849, probably assassinated. Known as an author, but not known as a member of the secret intelligence agency formed by the Americans descended from the American Revolution, known as the Society of Cincinnatus. This was a society that was created by Washington, Lafayette, and others, John Jay Hamilton, at the close of the war.
Did we lose you again, Dennis? No, it's not our connection. Oh boy. Dennis, are you there? Otherwise, we may just jump into the story if we can't get him back. Yeah, I think it's the case when you use StreamYard on your phone and you get phone calls, it completely disrupts your connection. It's annoying, but you know, hopefully we'll be able to get Dennis back. Dennis, are you there? Oh, maybe we should just jump right in. There was a place where we're going to start the story. Yeah. Dennis? Yeah, hi. There we go. Can you hear me? Dennis? Dennis? Okay. Let's see if he rejoins. We'll give him just a few seconds here. In the meantime, for people who may, oh, there's Dennis. Okay.
Okay. How
are you there, Dennis?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going on, but let me just ask, how much of what I said did you hear?
Not very much at all. Just born in, and then that was it.
Once again.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what's going on. I can try.
Are you getting phone calls?
No, I'm getting nothing. Nothing is happening. So, but you can hear me right now, correct?
Yes.
All right. So let me just try something to make sure that we can stay connected That's the other reason I didn't want to be on. Sorry about that, everybody. Let me see what's possible here. Okay, are you still able to hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can still hear you, Dennis.
Okay, fine. So let me try to get through this and we can get started. We're just really trying to say a couple things to introduce the story. Let's do this, Jose. Go right to the first of the four different openings of the same story, the murders in the Rue Morgue. And I'll try to set this up. You're still able to hear me, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so here's what we're doing, everybody. Edgar Poe was a member of, he was not merely a poet, he was not merely an author, as is often said. He was a member of the intelligence agency that had been created by Ben Franklin and company that created the conditions for the American Revolution, but then it morphed after at the end of the American Revolution, after November 25th, 1783. It became known as the Society of Cincinnatus. We could tell you some other time about why it was called that, but this was a secret intelligence agency which was supposed to continue the work of the American Revolution in the aftermath of the conflict, because the conflict is not the American Revolution. The battles are not the American Revolution. The battles are a phase in the American Revolution, which was something which had actually been begun in Massachusetts back between 1620 and 1630, and then evolved over time with a lot of different difficulties, changes, and backsliding. Many different things happened. When you talk about things like the question of slavery and the abolition of slavery, there are motions and movements done in Massachusetts, for example, before 1776 to abolish slavery. These things are not well known, but for example, that's how the African American called Prince Hall got his charter for the Masons organization. He got it from Lafayette. If you look it up, if you quote Google it, you'll be told that he comes from the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which is a British entity. It's not from that. That's a lie. It comes from Lafayette. And the reason for saying that is that in order to be able to properly commemorate the 250th birthday of this country, which should be done, telling the true history of the country and the very complex history also has to be done. So Edgar Poe and his work is part of that. He was a direct descendant of he was the grandson of a veteran, military veteran of the American Revolution named David Poe. David Poe was a logistics officer, the quartermaster for the Marquis de Lafayette. And in 1824, at the age of 15, Edgar Poe met the Marquis de Lafayette, and he was part of a color guard that was celebrating the return of Lafayette to America, basically, in 1824, when Lafayette came here to campaign for the election to the presidency of one of the final living veterans of the American Revolution, John Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, who had been president, and he was successfully elected president at the end of 1824. He took office in 1825 in March, exactly 200 years ago, and Poe and others were part of a campaign to try to return to the American Revolution, which had already begun to fade as early as the 1820s, 18 teens, in fact. So the stories that we read, the stories written by Poe, are part of a campaign for the creation of a revolutionary culture in America. This campaign was something that involved Poe. It involved James Fenimore Cooper, another author. it involved Washington Irving. And in the case of all of these individuals, he was another author. In the case of all these individuals, they are part of an intelligence service. You have to remember that America was still seen as kind of like you see or people talk to you about Cuba today, or maybe even Venezuela. It was seen as a revolutionary country. No heads of state visited it. In fact, no other head of state visited America until 1876 for a full 100 years, because America was seen as a dangerous country that proposed the overthrow of kings and of dictators. So I wanted to just say that much so that we set up why, again, we're reading these stories. A lot of people are new or have come around since we began this. So this is not about reading something because it's fun, which it may be, or it may be entertaining. It's about trying to understand something about the true nature of this country. For example, how should one understand things like the assassination of Charlie Kirk? Or how should one understand things like the assassination of Malcolm X? Why would those things be related? Not that I am in any way, shape, or form comparing the individual Charlie Kirk to Malcolm X. Okay. So don't get the wrong idea. That's like comparing pornography to a great novel because they're both written on paper. Okay. So I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that the means by which these things are in fact done are the same. And the means and the methods are what needs to be looked at, particularly if you intend to prevent that kind of thing from happening to other people whose significance may also be questionable to you, like Candace Owens or others. Because of the very charged partisan nature of how people discuss things today, it's very difficult for people to focus on what's important. For example, there is no, I repeat, no division whatsoever between the so-called Republican and the so-called Democratic parties in America. No division whatsoever. And the very notion that one gets involved in emotional partisanship around that is itself the success, shows the success of the manipulations of intelligence agencies. So it's exactly to try to rise above that so that people can understand what's actually happening that we have been pursuing looking at these stories. So last week, we began the story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue. What I'd like you to do, Jose, is just to read that paragraph that indicates, it's just written by someone, Poe's significance, and then we are going to just read a couple of paragraphs so that people can understand that even reading this story requires doing a certain amount of detective work before you start reading it.
All right, so 1841, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Edgar Allan Poe. Poe Edgar Allan, American poet, short story writer, and critic who is best known for his tales of ratiocination, his fantastical horror stories, and his genre-founding detective stories. Poe, whose cloudy personal life is a virtual legend, considered himself primarily a poet. The Murders in the Rue Morgue. The police are unable to solve the murders of a mother and her daughter. Considered the first detective story, this work made Poe the only American to ever invent a form of literature.
Okay, can you take that paragraph apart for people, Jose, to show or to at least to indicate what's wrong with it, or at least controversial?
Well, sure. Poe, whose cloudy personal life is a virtual legend.
That's one thing. Then there's also, what are the tales of ratiocination? That's just said. What are they referring to?
They're referring to his so-called detective stories. So, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, the mystery of Marie Roget, Purloined Letter. That's right, and think those are it, right? And
Yeah,
that's it.
but what does the term mean?
Oh, it's reason.
It's
Like
Okay, that's what you're saying. Okay, well, that's why we're going to read a few paragraphs, the first opening of this story, because the
well,
opening of
yep.
the opening of the story describes what ratiocination is. That's what it does. However, here's your problem, everybody. If you go try to look this story up, you're going to find at least 4 different versions of the opening, the very opening of the story. And the question is, why would that be true? How come there's not one version of this story? So what I would like you to do, Jose, is just read the opening paragraph in that version, and then read the
Another
other,
one. Yeah.
any other one, actually.
The murders in the Rue Morgue. What song the siren sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. Sir Thomas Browne, Urn Burial. The mental features discoursed of as the analytical are in themselves but little susceptible of analysis. We appreciate them only in their effects. We know of them, among other things, that they are always to their possessor, when inordinately possessed, a source of the liveliest enjoyment. I'll read one more sentence. As the strong man exults in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as calls his muscles into action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which disentangles. He
Okay,
derives.
that's one opening. That's one opening. Let's read what's supposed to be the opening of the very same story from another version that you have, that you'll get as soon as you try to so-called Google this story.
Yeah, here we go. So this is Edgar Allan Poe, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Part 1. Paris. It was in Paris. It was in the summer of 1840. There I met that strange and interesting young fellow, Auguste Dupin. Dupin was the last member of a well-known family, a family which had once been rich and famous. He himself, however, was far from rich. He cared little about money. He had enough to buy the most necessary things of life and a few books. He did not trouble himself about the rest, just books. With books, he was happy.
Okay, so that's the same exact story. If you were to look it up, that's what you would be told was the beginning. Okay, can you go to the third version?
Yes, pulling it up right now. Hold on. Here we go. I think
That's the phonological version.
oh the okay, here we go. Pulling it up now. It is not, here we go. It is not improbable that a few farther steps in phrenological science will lead to a belief in the existence, if not to the actual discovery and location of an organ of analysis. If this power, which may be described, although not defined, as the capacity for resolving thought into its elements, be not, in fact, an essential portion of what late philosophers term ideality, then there are indeed many good reasons for supposing it a primitive faculty.
Okay, now we could read more, but do me a favor and read the first sentence of the very first version that you read.
What song the siren sang? Oh, here we go. I'll share it too. This is from the very first version I read. What song the siren sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. Sir Thomas Browne, Urn Burial. The mental features discoursed of as the analytical are in themselves, but little susceptible of analysis. Oh, wow. That's, yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's just be clear, everybody. There are 2 differences here from the one we just read previously. One, there's a quote, and that quote is not in that other version. The second is that the other version, not the one that's just completely off, talking about Paris, talking about the second version, began with something about phrenology. Now, phrenology was a 19th century, 18th and 19th century fad, which described how various faculties of the mind were attributable to areas of the brain. Okay. And that literally bumps on the head. So you had an area where supposedly analysis was located. Poe didn't actually believe that. Poe was simply satirizing that. And he later says, by the way, in the beginning of this story, that he doesn't believe that. And what he's saying is that he doesn't doubt that some idiot is going to come up with some explanation in which it's going to be said that the reason that you can reason is because of some particular area of your brain. Now, notice, of course, that there are modern views of precisely that character, though maybe not that crudity. And it's relevant here just to reference, without us going into it, the work of people like Oliver Sacks and others who have shown that when you have the mind, when mind suffers neurological trauma, uh, car accident or severe blow to the head as a result of an assault, or other things, or even when portions of the brain are removed, that the brain is able to actually reproduce those capacities, even despite the fact that sections of the brain are compromised by lesions, by cancer, or by surgery. So this idea of what's being talked about in that paragraph, that's what Poe's referring to. So there's three different versions that we have referred to here. All right, so here's what we want to do. If you can now, Jose, just read the few paragraphs. We're not going to go over what we went over last week, everybody. We started last week, but we do want to read a few paragraphs from last week, just so you are aware that we're going to go right into the story about the murders here in a moment. But we at least want to give people the ability to get oriented on what we're talking about here. So if you could read, Jose, let's take the first couple of paragraphs, and that may be enough.
Sure.
That we
Okay.
selected. Yeah.
Alrighty. So just to sort of re-summarize what Dennis just said and what we're doing here, just so you're not confused. We already started reading the story. We started reading it a couple weeks ago, actually. We started, and then we picked back up again last week. So what we're doing here is we're just going to read a few paragraphs from the beginning and to catch you up to where we left off. So I'm also explaining that for those of you who are watching live at home, we have people in the room who are also completely new too. So I have to explain to them what's going on as well. But yeah, so that's what we're doing here. We're going to start with the first paragraph, Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar A. Poe. It is not improbable that a few farther steps in phrenological science will lead to a belief in the existence, if not to the actual discovery and location of an organ of analysis. If this power, which may be described, although not defined, as the capacity for resolving thought into its elements, be not, in fact, an essential portion of what late philosophers term ideality, then there are indeed many good reasons for supposing it a primitive faculty. That it may be a constituent of ideality is here suggested in opposition to the vulgar dictum, founded, however, upon the assumptions of grave authority, that the calculating and discriminating powers, causality and comparison, are at variance with the imaginative, that the three, in short, can hardly coexist. But although thus opposed to received opinion, the idea will not appear ill-founded when we observe that the processes of invention or creation are strictly akin with the processes of resolution, the former being nearly, if not absolutely, the latter conversed.
Okay. Can you just tell people what that's saying?
Sure. So basically, he's talking about in the beginning. He's saying that in a few more steps in phrenological science, which just means like that phrenology was a specific science called like eugenics, where they believed that the shape of your head could actually determine how smart you were or your intellect, right? So if I started rubbing my fingers over your head and tried to feel the bumps in your head, that could somehow dictate your intellect. And he's saying that he's saying that the phrenologist will discover that there is something called analysis, an organ of analysis, that there's like some part of you that can analyze. What? Like the brain? Sorry, there was a question here, Dennis. Or yeah.
People can hear it, Jose.
Oh wait, you can hear him.
No, I said just repeat it so people can hear it.
Oh, sorry. He said he asked, is it like the brain? Is Poe referring to the brain?
Yeah, a part of the brain.
Okay. So then he goes on to talk about how how do I summarize this here? And kind of feel free to come in and help me out too if you want.
There's
Yeah, let Kynan just come up and say what he thinks.
Yeah, well, you already talked about the shape of the head, phrenology, and everything, but then he talks about 3 different powers of, I guess, the brain. There's the calculating and the discriminating powers. The calculating dealing with causality, the discriminating dealing with comparison, and that they're at variance with the imaginative, and that these 3 things, they can hardly coexist. So I think the calculating and the discriminating, it has to deal with, actually analyzing things. And I'm not entirely sure what he means by the imaginative.
Well, because he says that the causality, the calculating, and the discriminating powers are at variance with the imagination, or the imaginative, excuse me. And but sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, but he was saying, well, what do you mean by the imaginative?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, think about the artistic. Don't people all the time say, if you're an artist, that you're not a mathematician?
Right.
People say, I'm in the arts. I'm not in the sciences. You get all.
Or like what they say, like, oh, I'm left brained, which is the more analytical. I'm not right brained. I'm not so creative. I'm more analytical.
Yeah. Right. So what is he saying about that?
But although those opposed to received opinion, the idea will not appear ill-founded when we observe that the processes of invention or creation are strictly akin with the processes of resolution. The former being nearly,
So he's refuting the idea that they're at variance with each other.
Yeah.
But they actually do coexist. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So he's saying the opposite of what almost everybody teaches in almost every school in the United States.
Right.
Okay, that's what he's claiming. Okay, why don't you do this? Let's skip the next one I gave you, Jose, and then go to the one about residing in Paris.
Okay, no problem. Sorry, did you have something? Were you going to ask something? Oh, okay, great. All right, so now, by the way, at this part in the story, the sentence that precedes it is the narrative which follows will appear to the reader somewhat in the light of a commentary upon the propositions just advanced. So, I mean, you and I, after this, we can revisit earlier.
You don't need to. Just go ahead.
Anyway, residing in Paris during the spring and part of the summer of 18, I there contracted an intimacy with a Monsieur C. Auguste Dupin. This young gentleman was of an excellent, indeed of an illustrious family, but by a variety of untoward events had been reduced to such poverty that the quondam energy of his character succumbed beneath it, and he ceased to bestir himself in the world, or to care for the retrieval of his fortunes by courtesy of his creditors. There still remained in his possession a small remnant of his patrimony, and upon the income arising from this, he managed, by means of a rigorous economy, to procure the necessaries of life without troubling himself about its superfluities. Books, indeed, were his sole luxuries, and in Paris these are easily obtained.
Yeah, go to the next one.
Okay. Our first meeting. Excuse me.
It was a freak of fancy.
Got it. Yep. It was a freak of fancy. So now we're going down a couple paragraphs. Okay, you found it. Great. It was a freak of fancy in my friend, for what else shall I call it, to be enamored of the night for her own sake, and into this bizarrerie, as into all his others, I quietly fell, giving myself up to his wild whims with an utter abandon. The sable divinity would not herself dwell with us always, but we could counterfeit her presence. At the first dawn of the morning, we closed all the massy shutters of our old building, lighting a couple of tapers which, strongly perfumed, threw out only the ghastliest and feeblest of rays. By the aid of these, we then busied our souls in dreams, reading, writing, or conversing, until warned by the clock of the advent of the true darkness. Then we sallied forth into the streets, arm in arm, continuing the topics of the day, or roaming far and wide until a late hour, seeking, amid the wild lights and shadows of the populous city, the infinity of mental excitement which quiet observation would afford. Okay. At such times, I could not help remarking and admiring, although from his rich ideality I had been prepared to expect, a peculiar analytic ability in Dupin. He seemed to take an eager delight in its exercise, if not exactly in its display, and did not hesitate to confess the pleasure thus derived. He boasted to me, with a low chuckling laugh, that most men, in respect to himself, wore windows into their bosoms, and was wont to follow up such assertions by direct and very startling proofs of his intimate knowledge of my own. His manner at these moments was frigid and abstract. His eyes were vacant in expression, while his voice, usually a rich tenor, rose into a treble, which would have sounded petulantly but for the deliberateness and entire distinctness of the enunciation. Observing him in these moods, I often dwelt meditatively upon the old philosophy of the bipart soul, and amused myself with the fancy of a double Dupin, the creative and the resolvent.
So, Kynan, can you say just what's going on here?
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
and then we'll be able to go right into the actual particulars of the story.
Yeah, so he's just talking about Dupin's character and the fact that he takes a pleasure in analyzing things. And that I'm just going on through here, but he says, when he's that Dupin had boasted to him, the low chuckling laugh, that most men respected themselves wore windows in their bosoms, is was one to follow up such assertions by direct and very startling proofs of his intimate knowledge of my own.
He's saying that men are easy to read
Men are easy to read.
because they're transparent, like they wear windows into their bosoms, and
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
there's also a whole discussion about the night before this. There's a discussion in which what they're saying is that they always try to live in the night.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't read the thing in before, but it's basically when it would get to be daylight, they would darken the room and they would put on candles. We didn't read that part. But they do say here, and they make it clear in there where it says, it was a freak of fancy in my friend to be enamored of the night for her own sake. Says, and into this bizarrerie, I quietly fell. The sable divinity, in other words, night, would not herself dwell with us always, but we could counterfeit her presence. The first dawn of the morning, we closed all the massy shutters of our old building. And then it talks about how they would be inside, they would read, they would write, they would talk. And then once they knew it was night, then they went out. And then what they did was they walked all around. And it says they walked around inside of the city, this being Paris. And they just said there's an infinity of mental excitement which quiet observation could afford. Okay. And then later on, at the end of that section, he says, observing him, Dupin, in these moods, I often dwelt meditatively upon the old philosophy of the bipart soul and amused myself with the fancy of a double Dupin, the creative and the resolvent. Okay, now why is that important? I'll tell you something. Why not think about this? This is a story, remember. It's not really, we can say they're real characters, but he's talking about characteristics. Mm-hmm. So keep in mind that this isn't necessarily really the night, but it is like the night in which people discover everything. Anything you discover is like bringing light into a darkened room. Any new invention didn't exist in the human mind until it was discovered. That's why people talk about it being illuminated. So the idea here is that they are in this constant state of seeking for things which are hidden or seem to be hidden. But Dupin is saying, well, for me, I can look at you and I can tell things about you, just like you had spoken to me about these things. And what we are omitting here is we're not going to read that section we read last week in which he basically does that. But what we're going to do now is to just notice in talking about the story, and this is going to take us a while, but it's relevant, is that there's been a murder, the police can't solve it, and the question is, can Dupin solve the murder? And this was the first story ever written from at least in the English language. Maybe this is not true in another language, but it's the first story ever written in the English language, which began all the other stories that people talk about with Sherlock Holmes or Poirot or any of the other detective stories, Sam Spade. All of that stuff all came from this story that we're reading. This was an invention. So the thing that we're reading, we started out post talking about all these things about analysis and so on, and invention and creativity. And what he then proceeds to do is to invent the detective story here. So he's not just talking about something abstractly, he's doing something. And his invention is what we're now reading. Okay, so from here, whoever should start reading or wants to start, I guess we have 3 readers. Whichever one, if you want to do it, Kynan, or you want to start, Jose, doesn't matter.
Sure. Right. Basically, just from where we left off, right?
Yeah, extraordinary murders. I think you're running. I think right there, so people know what happened.
Okay. Extraordinary murders. Okay, so I'll start with the sentence before. Not long after this, we were looking over an evening edition.
Sure.
Le Tribunal. So hold on, we're just finding it here in person. Give us a second here, Dennis.
Fine, and if you need me to read, I can also help.
Sure. Alrighty, so not long after this, we were looking over an evening edition of Le Tribunal when the following paragraphs arrested our attention. Extraordinary murders. This morning, at about 3 o'clock, the inhabitants of the Quartier Saint-Roch were aroused from sleep by a succession of terrific shrieks, issuing apparently from the 4th story of a house in the Rue Morgue, known to be in the sole occupancy of one Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter Mademoiselle Camille L'Espanaye. After some delay, occasioned by a fruitless attempt to procure admission in the usual manner, the gateway was broken in with a crowbar, and 8 or 10 of the neighbors entered, accompanied by 2 gendarmes, police officers. By this time, the cries had ceased, but as the party rushed up to the first flight of stairs, two or more rough voices and angry contention were distinguished and seemed to proceed from the upper part of the house. As the second landing was reached, these sounds also had ceased, and everything remained perfectly quiet. The party spread themselves and hurried from room to room. Upon arriving at a large back chamber in the fourth story, the door of which, being found locked, with the key inside, was forced open. A spectacle presented itself which struck everyone present, not less with horror than with astonishment. The apartment was in the wildest disorder. The furniture, uh, the furniture broken and thrown about in all directions. There was only one bedstead, and from this the bed had been removed and thrown into the middle of the floor. On a chair lay a razor besmeared with blood. On the hearth were two or three long, thick tresses of gray human hair, also dabbled in blood and seeming to have been pulled out by the roots. Upon the floor were found 4 Napoleons, an earring of topaz, 3 large silver spoons, 3 smaller of metal d'Alger, and 2 bags containing nearly 4,000 francs in gold. The drawers of a bureau, which stood in one corner, were open and had apparently rifled, although many articles still remained in them. A small iron safe was discovered under the bed, not under the bedstead. It was open, with the key still in the door. It had no contents beyond a few old letters and other papers of little consequence. Of Madame L'Espanaye no traces were here seen, but an unusual quantity of soot being observed in the fireplace. A search was made in the chimney, and, horrible to relate, the corpse of the daughter, head downward, was dragged therefrom. It having been thus forced upon the narrow aperture for a considerable distance. The body was quite warm. Upon examining it, many excoriations were perceived, no doubt occasioned by the violence with which it had been thrust up and disengaged. Upon the face were many severe scratches, and upon the throat dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails, as if the deceased had been throttled to death. After a thorough investigation of every portion of the house, without farther discovery, the party made its way into a small paved yard in the rear of the building, where lay the corpse of the old lady, with her throat so entirely cut that, upon an attempt to raise her head, the head fell off and rolled to some distance. The body, as well as the head, was fearfully mutilated, the former so much so as scarcely to retain any semblance of humanity. To this horrible mystery, there is not as yet, we believe, the slightest clue. The next day's paper had these additional particulars. The tragedy in the Rue Morgue. Many individuals have been examined in relation to this most extraordinary and frightful affair. The word affair has not yet, in France, the levity of import which it conveys with us, but nothing whatever has transpired to throw light upon it. We give below all the material testimony elicited. Pauline Dubourg, laundress, deposes that she has known both the deceased for 3 years, having washed for them during that period. The old lady and her daughter seemed on good terms, very affectionate towards each other. They were excellent pay, could not speak in regard to their mode or means of living, believed that Madame L. told fortunes for a living, was reputed to have money put by, never met any persons in the house when she called for the clothes or took them home, was sure that they had no servant in employ. There appeared to be no furniture in any part of the building except in the 4th story. Pierre Moreau, tobacconist, deposes that he has been in the habit of selling small quantities of tobacco and snuff to Madame L'Espanaye for nearly 4 years. Was born in the neighborhood and has always resided there. The deceased and her daughter had occupied the house in which the corpses were found for more than 6 years. It was formerly occupied by a jeweler, who underlet the upper rooms to various persons. The house was the property of Madame L. She became dissatisfied with the abuse of the premises by her tenant, and moved into them herself, refusing to let any portion. The old lady was childish, Witness had seen the daughter some 5 or 6 times during the years. The two lived an exceedingly retired life, were reputed to have money, had heard it said among the neighbors that Madame L told fortunes, did not believe it. Oh, had heard it said among the neighbors that Madame L told fortunes, did not believe it. Had never seen any person enter the door except the old lady and her daughter, a porter once or twice, and a physician some 8 or 10 times. Many other persons, neighbors, gave evidence to the same effect. No one was spoken of as frequenting the house. It was not known whether there was any living connections of Madame L and her daughter. The shutters of the front windows were seldom opened. Those in the rear were always closed, with the exception of the large back room, fourth story. The house was a good house, not very old. Isidore Musée, gendarme, disposes that he was called to the house about 3 o'clock in the morning and found some 20 or 30 persons at the gateway endeavoring to gain admittance. Forced it open at length with a bayonet, not with a crowbar. Had but little difficulty in getting it open, on account of its being a double or folding gate, and bolted neither at bottom nor top. The shrieks were continued until the gate was forced, and then suddenly ceased. They seemed to be screams of some person or persons in great agony, were loud and drawn out, not short and quick. Witnesses led the way upstairs. Upon reaching the first landing, heard two voices in loud and angry contention, the one a gruff voice, the other much shriller, a very strange voice. Could distinguish some words of the former, which was that of a Frenchman, was positive that it was not a woman's voice, could distinguish the words sacre and diable. The shrill voice was that of a foreigner. Could not be sure whether it was the voice of a man or of a woman. Could not make out what was said, but believed the language to be Spanish. The state of the room and of the bodies was described by this witness as we described them yesterday. I'll read one more and then I'll pass it off to you, Kynan. Henry Duval, a neighbor and by trade a silversmith, deposes that he was one of the party who first entered the house. Corroborates the testimony of Musée in general. As soon as they forced an entrance, they reclosed the door to keep out the crowd, which collected very fast, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour. The shrill voice, this witness thinks, was that of an Italian. Was certain it was not French. Could not be sure that it was a man's voice. It might have been a woman's. Was not acquainted with the Italian language. Could not distinguish the words, but was convinced by the intonation that the speaker was an Italian. Knew Madame L and her daughter. Had conversed with both frequently. Was sure that the shrill voice was not that of either of the deceased.
And one thing, let me just add, before you pass it off, there's one sentence that was missing from your description of Isidore Musée, and it was, might have distinguished some words, could not make out what was said, but believed the language to be Spanish, might have distinguished some words if he had been acquainted with Spanish. Okay, so just know that that was a sentence that was missing from what you read.
Okay. Blank Odenheimer, restaurateur. This witness volunteered his testimony. Not speaking French, was examined through an interpreter. Is a native of Amsterdam. Was passing the house at the time of the shrieks. They lasted for several minutes, probably 10. They were long and loud, very awful and distressing. Was one of those who entered the building. Corroborated the previous evidence in every respect but one. Was sure that the shrill voice was that of a man, of a Frenchman. Could not distinguish the words uttered. They were loud and quick, unequal, sometimes quick, sometimes deliberate, spoken apparently in fear as well as in anger. The voice was harsh, not so much shrill as harsh. Could not call it a shrill voice. The gruff voice said repeatedly, sacre, diable, and once mon Dieu. Jules Mignard, banker of the firm of Mignard et Fils, Rue de Lorraine, is the elder Mignard. Madame L'Espanaye had some property. Had opened an account with his banking house in the spring of the year blank 8 years previously, made frequent deposits in small sums, had checked for nothing until the third day before her death, when she took out in person the sum of 4,000 francs. The sum was paid in gold, and a clerk sent home with the money. Adolphe Le Bon, clerk to Messieurs Mignard et Fils, deposes that on the day in question, about noon, he accompanied Madame L'Espanaye to her residence with the 4,000 francs, put up in 2 bags. Upon the door being open, Mademoiselle L. appeared and took from his hands one of the bags, while the old lady relieved him of the other. He then bowed and departed. Did not see any person in the street at the time. It is a by-street, very lonely. William Bird, tailor, deposes that he was one of the party who entered the house, is an Englishman, has lived in Paris 2 years, was one of the first to ascend the stairs, heard the voices in contention. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, could make out several words, but cannot now remember all. Heard distinctly sacré and mon Dieu. There was a sound at the moment as if of several persons struggling, a scraping and scuffling sound. The shrill voice was very loud, louder than the gruff one. Is sure that it was not the voice of an Englishman, appeared to be that of a German, might have been a woman's voice, does not understand German. 4 of the above named witnesses, being recalled, deposed that the door of the chamber in which was found the body of Mademoiselle L. was locked on the inside when the party reached it. Everything was perfectly silent, no groans or noises of any kind. Upon forcing the door, no person was seen. The windows, both of the back and front room, were down and firmly fastened from within. A door between the 2 rooms was closed, but not locked. The door leading from the front room into the passage was locked, with the key on the inside. A small room in the front of the house, on the 4th story, at the head of the passage, was open, the door being ajar. This room was crowded with old beds, boxes, and so forth. These were carefully removed and searched. There was not an inch of any portion of the house which was not carefully searched. Sweeps were sent up and down the chimneys. The door was a 4-story one. The house was a 4-story one, with garrets, mansards. A trapdoor on the roof was nailed down very securely. Did not appear to have been opened for years. The time elapsing between the hearing of the voices in contention and the breaking open of the room door was variously stated by the witnesses. Some made it as short as 3 minutes, some as long as 5. The door was opened with difficulty. Alfonso Garcia, undertaker, deposes that he resides in the Rue Morgue, is a native of Spain, was one of the party who entered the house, did not proceed upstairs, is nervous, and was apprehensive of the consequences of agitation. Heard the voices in contention. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, could not distinguish what was said. The shrill voice was that of an Englishman. Is sure of this. Does not understand the English language, but judges by the intonation. Alberto Montani, confectioner, deposes that he was among the first to ascend the stairs. Heard the voices in question. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, distinguished several words. The speaker appeared to be expostulating. Could not make out the words of the shrill voice. Spoke quick and unevenly. Thinks it the voice of a Russian. Corroborates the general testimony. Is an Italian. Never conversed with a native of Russia. Several witnesses recalled here testified that the chimneys of all the rooms on the 4th story were too narrow to admit the passage of a human being. By sweeps were meant cylindrical sweeping brushes, such as are employed by those who clean chimneys. These brushes were passed up and down every flue in the house. There is no back passage by which anyone could have descended while the party proceeded upstairs. The body of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was so firmly wedged in the chimney that it could not be got down until 4 or 5 of the party united their strength. Paul Dumas. Yeah. Paul Dumas, physician, deposes that he was called to view the bodies about daybreak. They were both then lying on the sacking of the bedstead in the chamber where Mademoiselle L was found. The corpse of the young lady was much bruised and excoriated. The fact that it had been thrust up the chimney would sufficiently account for these appearances. The throat was greatly chafed. There were several deep scratches just below the chin, together with a series of livid spots which were evidently the impression of fingers. The face was fearfully discolored, and the eyeballs protruded. The tongue had been partially bitten through. A large bruise was discovered upon the pit of the stomach, produced, apparently, by the pressure of a knee. In the opinion of M. Dumas, Mademoiselle L'Espanaye had been throttled to death by some person or persons unknown. The corpse of the mother was horribly mutilated. All the bones of the right leg and arm were more or less shattered. The left tibia much splintered, as well as all the ribs of the left side. Whole body dreadfully bruised and discolored. It was not possible to say how the injuries had been inflicted. A heavy club of wood, or a broad bar of iron, a chair, any large, heavy, and obtuse weapon would have produced such results if wielded by the hands of a very powerful man. No woman could have inflicted the blows with any weapon. The head of the deceased, when seen by witness, was entirely separated from the body and was also greatly shattered. Wow. The throat had evidently been cut with some very sharp instrument, probably with a razor. Alexander Etienne, a surgeon, was called with M. Dumas to view the bodies, corroborated the testimony and the opinions of M. Dumas. Nothing farther of importance was elicited, although several other persons were examined. A murder so mysterious and so perplexing in all its particulars was never before committed in Paris, if indeed a murder has been committed at all. The police are entirely at fault, an unusual occurrence in affairs of this nature. There is not, however, the shadow of a clue apparent. The evening edition of the paper stated that the greatest excitement still continued in the Quartier Saint-Roch, that the premises in question had been carefully researched and fresh examinations of witnesses instituted, but all to no purpose. A postscript, however, mentioned that Adolphe Le Bon had been arrested and imprisoned, although nothing appeared to criminate him beyond the facts already detailed.
Let me just mention that we're going to need to have two readers next. Well, at least there's a lot for Dupin, I suppose, but we're going to have a kind of like a narrator and then a Dupin. So just
Okay. Move over a little bit.
There we go, Jose.
Okay.
Oh, you want to just finish that part you're reading, kind, and then Jose is going to do Dupin? Is that what's going to happen?
No, we'll just
okay, great. Go ahead.
We'll sit in the frame.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Dupin seemed singularly interested in the progress of this affair. At least so I judge from his manner, for he made no comments whatever. It was only after the announcement that Le Bon had been imprisoned that he asked me my opinion respecting it. I can merely agree with all Paris in considering it an insoluble mystery. I saw by no means by which it would be possible to trace the murderer.
We must not judge we must not judge of the means,
said Dupin,
by the shell of an examination. The Parisian police, so much extolled for acumen, are cunning, but no more. There is no method in their proceedings beyond the method of the moment. They make a vast parade of measures, but not unfrequently these are so illy adapted to the objects proposed as to put us in the mind of Monsieur Jourdain's calling for his robe de chambre pour mieux entendre la musique.
It means these calls for his dressing gown the better to hear the music.
The results attained by them are not unfrequently surprising, but for the most part are brought about by simple diligence and activity. When these qualities are unveiling, their schemes fail. Vidocq, for example, was a good guesser and a preserving man, but without educated thought, he erred continually by the very intensity of his investigations. He impaired his vision by holding the object too close. He might see perhaps one or two points with unusual clearness, but in doing so, he necessarily lost his sight of the matter as a whole. Thus, there is such a thing as being too profound. Truth is not always in a well. In fact, as regards to the more important knowledge, I do believe that she is invariably superficial. The depth lies in the valleys where we seek her, and not upon the mountaintops where she is found. The modes and sources of this kind of error are well typified in the contemplation of the heavenly bodies. To look at a star by glances, to view it in a sidelong way by turning toward it the exterior portions of the retina, more susceptible of the feeble impressions of light than the interior, is to behold the star distinctly, is to have the appreciation of its luster, a luster which grows dim just in proportion as we turn our vision fully upon it. A great number of rays actually fall upon the eye in the latter case, but in the former there is the more refined capacity for comprehension. By undue profundity we perplex and enfeeble thought, and it is possible to make even Venus herself vanish from the firmament by a scrutiny too sustained, too concentrated, and too direct. As for these murders, let us enter into some examinations for ourselves, before we make up an opinion respecting them. An inquiry will afford us amusement.
I thought this an odd term, so supplied, but said nothing.
And besides, Le Bon once rendered me a service for which I am not ungrateful. We will go and see the premises with our own eyes. I know G, the Prefet de Police, and shall have no difficulty in obtaining the necessary permission.
This permission was obtained, and we proceeded at once to the Rue Morgue. This is one of those miserable thoroughfares which intervene between the Rue Richelieu and the Rue Saint-Roch. It was late in the afternoon when we reached it, for this quartier is at a great distance from that in which we resided. The house we readily found, for there were still many persons gazing up at the closed shutters, with an objectless curiosity, from the opposite side of the way. It was an ordinary Parisian house, with a gateway, on one side of which was a glazed watchbox, with a sliding panel in the window, indicating a loge de concierge, concierge's booth. Before going in, we walked up the street, turned down an alley, and then, again turning, passed in the rear of the building. Dupin, meanwhile, examining the whole neighborhood, as well as the house, with a minuteness for attention for which I could not see no possible object. Retracting our steps, we came again to the front of the dwelling, rang, and, having shown our credentials, were admitted by the agents in charge. We went upstairs, into the chamber where the body of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye had been found, and where both the deceased still lay. The disorders of the room had, as usual, been suffered to exist. I saw nothing beyond what had been stated in the tribunal. Dupin scrutinized everything, not excepting the bodies of the victims. We then went into the other rooms and into the yard, a gendarme accompanying us throughout. Our examination occupied us until dark, when we took our departure. On our way home, my companion stepped in for a moment at the office of one of the daily papers. I have said that the whims of my friend were manifold, and that je les ménageais.
I put up with
I put up with them. For this phrase, there is no English equivalent. It was his humor now to decline all conversation on the subject of the murder until after we had taken a bottle of wine together about noon the next day. He then asked me suddenly if I had observed anything peculiar at the scene of the atrocity. There was something in his manner of emphasizing the word peculiar, which caused me to shudder, without knowing why. No, nothing peculiar, I said. Nothing more, at least, than we both saw stated in the paper.
Le Tribunal
He replied.
has not entered. I fear into the unusual horror of the thing, but we will not revert to the idle opinions of this print. It appears to me that this mystery is considered insoluble for the very reason which should cause it to be regarded as easy of solution. I mean, for the outre character of its features. The police are confounded by the seeming absence of motive, not for the murder itself, but for the atrocity of the murder. They are puzzled by the seeming impossibility of reconciling the voices heard in contention with the facts that no one was discovered upstairs but the assassinated Mademoiselle L'Espanaye, and that there were no means of egress without the notice of the party ascending. The wild disorder of the room, the corpse thrust with the head downward up the chimney, the frightful mutilation of the body of the old lady, these considerations, with those just mentioned and others which I need not mention, have sufficed to paralyze the powers, by putting completely at fault the boasted acumen of the government agents. They have fallen into the gross but common error of confounding the unusual with the abstruse. But it is by these deviations from the plane of the ordinary that reason feels its way, if at all, in its search after the true. In investigations such as we are now pursuing, it should not be so much asked what has occurred as what has occurred which has never occurred before. In fact, the facility with which I shall arrive or have arrived at the solution of this mystery is an exact ratio with its apparent insolubility in the eyes of the police.
I stared at the speaker in mute astonishment.
I am now awaiting,
continued he, looking toward the door of our apartment.
I am now awaiting a person who, although perhaps not the perpetrator of these butcheries, must have been in some measure implicated in their perpetration. Of the worst portion of the crimes committed, it is probable that he is innocent. I hope that I am right in this supposition, for upon it I build my expectation of reading the entire riddle. I look for the man here, in this room, every moment. It is true that he may not arrive, but the probability is that he will. Should he come, it will be necessary to detain him. Here are pistols, and we both know how to use them when occasion demands their use.
I took the pistols, scarcely knowing what I did, or believing what I heard, while Dupin went on, very much as if in a soliloquy. I have already spoken of his abstract manner at such times. His discourse was addressed to myself, but his voice, although by no means loud, had that intonation which is commonly employed in speaking to someone at a greater distance. His eyes, vacant in expression, regarded only the wall. That the voices heard.
That the voices heard in contention. He said. By the party upon the stairs were not the voices of the women themselves, was fully proved by the evidence. This relieves us all of all doubt upon the question whether the old lady could have first destroyed the daughter and afterwards have committed suicide. I speak of this point chiefly for the sake of method, for the strength of Madame L'Espanaye would have been utterly unequal to the task of thrusting her daughter's corpse up the chimney as it was found, and the nature of the wounds upon her own person entirely preclude the idea of self-destruction. Murder, then, has been committed by some third party, and the voices of this third party were those heard in contention. Let me now avert, not to the whole testimony respecting those voices, but to what that was particular in that testimony. Did you observe anything?
What was peculiar in the testimony?
To what was peculiar in that testimony? Did you observe anything peculiar about it?
I remarked that, while all the witnesses agreed in supposing the gruff voice to be that of a Frenchman, there was much disagreement in regard to the shrill, or, as one individual termed it, the harsh voice.
That was the evidence itself,
said Dupin.
But it was not the peculiarity of the evidence. You have observed nothing distinctive. re-employing my own words. I may say that you have pointed out no prominence above the plane of the ordinary, by which reason may feel her way, yet there was something to be pointed out. The witnesses, as you remark, agreed about the gruff voice. They were here unanimous, but in regard to the shrill voice, the peculiarity is not that they disagreed, but that while an Italian, an Englishman, a Spaniard, a Hollander, and a Frenchman attempted to describe it, each one spoke of it as that of a foreigner. Each is sure that it was not the voice of one of his own countrymen. Each likens it not to the voice of an individual of any nation with whose language he is conversant, but the converse. The Frenchman supposes it the voice of a Spaniard and might have distinguished some words had he been acquainted with the Spanish. The Dutchman maintains it to have been that of a Frenchman, but we find it stated that, not understanding French, this witness was examined through an interpreter. The Englishman thinks it the voice of a German and does not understand German. The Spaniard is sure that it was that of an Englishman, but judges by the intonation altogether, as he has no knowledge of the English. The Italian believes it the voice of a Russian, but has never conversed with a native of Russia. A second Frenchman differs, moreover, with the first, and is positive that the voice is that of an Italian, but not being cognizant of that tongue is like the Spaniard, convinced by the intonation. Now, how strangely unusual must that voice have really been, about which such testimony as this could have been elicited, in whose tones even denizens of the 5 great divisions of Europe could recognize nothing familiar. You will say that it might have been the voice of an Asiatic or of an African. Neither Asiatics nor Africans abound in Paris, but without denying the inference, it will now just merely call your attention to 3 points which have relation to this topic. The voice is termed by one witness harsh rather than shrill. It is represented by 2 others to have been quick and unequal. No words, no sound resembling words were by any witnesses mentioned as distinguishable. You want to take over as Dupin?
Sure. I know not,
Continued Dupin,
what impression I have made so far upon your own understanding, but I do not hesitate to say that legitimate deductions, even from this portion of the testimony, the portion respecting the gruff and shrill voices, are in themselves sufficient to engender a suspicion which should bias or give direction to all farther progress in the investigation of the mystery. I said legitimate deductions. By my meaning is not thus fully expressed. I designed to imply that the deductions were the sole proper ones, and that the suspicion arose invariably from them as the single result. What the suspicion is, however, I will not say just yet. I merely wish you to bear in mind that, with myself, it was sufficiently forcible to give a definite form, a certain tendency, to my inquiries in the chamber. Suzanne, do you want to continue? I'm getting tired.
Okay.
here, you can take the book.
Just take my book.
You have to show me. where
Yeah.
you are,
Of
because
course.
I'll get us started. And then she can figure out where it is. Let us now transport ourselves in fancy to that chamber. What shall we first seek here? The means of egress employed by the murderers. And that's what, how did they get out?
Oh.
It is not too much to say that we neither of us believe in preternatural events. Madame and Mademoiselle de L'Espanaye were not destroyed by spirits. The doers of the dark deed were material and escaped materially. Then how? Fortunately, there is but one mode of reasoning upon this point, and that mode must lead us to a definite decision. Let us examine each by each the possible means of egress. It is clear that the assassins were in the room where Mademoiselle L'Espanaye was found, or at least in the room adjoining, when the party ascended the stairs. It is then only from these 2 apartments that we have to seek for issues, for exit. The police have laid bare the floors, the ceilings, and the masonry of the walls in every direction. No secret issues could have escaped their vigilance. But not trusting to their eyes, I examined with my own. There were then no secret issues. Both doors leading from the rooms into the passage were securely locked with the keys inside. Let us turn to the chimneys. These, although of ordinary width for some 8 or 10 feet above the hearths, will not admit, through their extent, the body of a large cat. The impossibility of egress by means already stated being thus absolute, we are reduced to the windows. Through those of the front room, no one could have escaped without notice from the crowd in the street. The murderers must have passed then through those of the back room. Now, brought to this conclusion in so unequivocal a manner as we are, it is not our part as reasoners to reject it on account of apparent impossibilities. It is only left for us to prove that these impossibilities are not such. There are 2 windows in the chamber. One of them is unobstructed by furniture and is wholly visible. The lower portion of the other is hidden from view by the head of the unwieldy bedstead, which is thrust close up against it. The former was found securely fastened from within. It resisted the utmost force of those who endeavored to raise it. A large gimlet hole had been pierced in its frame to the left, and a very stout nail was found fitted therein, nearly to the head. Upon examining the other window, a similar nail was seen similarly fitted in it, and a vigorous attempt to raise this sash failed also. The police were now entirely satisfied that egress had not been in these directions, and therefore it was thought a matter of supererogation to withdraw the nails and open the windows. In other words, it's thought to be superfluous to do that. My own examination was somewhat more particular, and was so for the reason I have just given, because here it was I knew that all apparent impossibilities must be proved to be not such in reality. I proceeded to think thus a posteriori. The murderers did escape from one of these windows. This being so, they could not have refastened the sashes from the inside, as they were found fastened. The consideration which put a stop through its obviousness to the scrutiny of the police in this quarter. Yet the sashes were fastened. They must then have the power of fastening themselves. There was no escape from this conclusion. I stepped to the unobstructed casement, withdrew the nail with some difficulty, and attempted to raise the sash. It resisted all my efforts, as I had anticipated. A concealed spring must, I now knew, exist. And this corroboration of my idea convinced me that my premises, at least, were correct, however mysterious still appeared the circumstances attending the nails. A careful search soon brought to light the hidden spring. I pressed it, and satisfied with the discovery, forbore to upraise the sash. You want to pick it up from there, Suzanne?
Okay. I now replaced the nail and regarded it attentively. A person passed out through this window might have reclosed it, and the spring would have caught, but the nail could not have been replaced. The conclusion was plain, and again narrowed in the field of my investigations. The assassins must have escaped through the other window. Supposing then the springs upon each sash to be the same, as was probable, there must be found a difference between the nails, or at least between the mode of their fixture. Getting upon the sacking of the bedstead, I looked over the headboard minutely at the second casement. Passing my hand down behind the board, I readily discovered and pressed the spring, which was, as I had supposed, identical in character with its neighbor. I now looked at the nail. It was as stout as the other, and apparently fitted in the same manner, driven in nearly up to the head. You will say that I was puzzled, but if you think so, you must have misunderstood the nature of the inductions. To use a sporting phrase, I had not been once at fault. The scent had never for an instant been lost. There was no flaw in any link of the chain. I had traced the secret to its ultimate result, and that result was the nail. Yet had I said in every respect, the appearance of its fellow in the other window, but the fact was an absolute nullity, conclusive as it might seem to be when compared with the consideration that here at this point terminated the clue. There must be something wrong. I said about the nail. I touched it, and the head, with about the eighth of an inch of the shank, came off in my fingers. The rest of the shank was in the gimlet hole, where it had been broken off. The fracture was an old one, for its edges were encrusted with rust, and had apparently been accomplished by the blow of a hammer, which had partially embedded in the top of the bottom sash the head portion of the nail. I now carefully replaced this head portion in the indentation whence I had taken it, and the resemblance to a perfect nail was complete. Pressing the spring, I gently raised the sash for a few inches. The head went up with it, remaining firm in its bed. I closed the window, and the semblance of the whole nail was again perfect. The riddle, so far, was now unriddled. The assassins had escaped through the window which looked upon the bed, dropping of its own accord upon the exit, or perhaps purposely closed by them. It had become fastened by the spring, and it was a retention of this spring which had been mistaken by the police for that of the nail, farther inquiry being thus considered unnecessary. The next question is that of the mode of descent. Upon this point, I had been satisfied in my walk with you around the building. About 5.5 feet from the casement in question, there ran a lightning rod. From this rod, it would have been impossible for anyone to reach the window itself, to say nothing of entering it. I observed, however, that the shutters of the fourth story were of the peculiar kind called by Parisian carpenters barrades, a kind rarely employed at the present day, but frequently seen upon very old mansions at Lyons and Bordeaux. There are in the form of this ordinary door a single, not a folding door, except that the lower half is latticed or worked in open trellis, thus affording an excellent hold for the hands. In the present instance, these shutters are fully 3.5 feet broad. When we saw them from the rear of the house, they were both about half open. That is to say, they stood off at right angles from the wall. It is probable that the police, as well as myself, examined the back of the tenement, but if so, in looking at these farades in the line of their breadth, as they must have done, they did not perceive this great breadth itself, or at all events failed to take it into due consideration. In fact, having once satisfied themselves that the egress could not have been made in this quarter, they would naturally bestow here a very cursory examination. It was clear to me, however, that the shutter belonging to the window at the head of the bed would, if swung fully back to the wall, reach to within 2 feet of the lightning rod. It was also evident that by exertion of a very unusual degree of activity and courage, an entrance into the window from the rod might have been thus effected. By reaching to the distance of 2.5 feet, we now suppose the shutter open to its whole extent. A robber might have taken a firm grasp upon the trellis work, letting go then his hold upon the rod, placing his feet firmly against the wall, and springing boldly from it. He might have swung the shutter so as to close it, and if we imagine the window open at the time, might have even swung himself into the room. I wish you to bear especially in mind that I have spoken of a very unusual degree of activity as requisite to success in so hazardous and so difficult a feat. It is my design to show you first that the thing might possibly have been accomplished, but secondly and chiefly, I wish to impress upon your understanding the very extraordinary, the almost preternatural character of that agility which could have accomplished it. Want to pick up?
You keep going just for one more. And then
Okay.
I'll take over.
You will say, no doubt, using the language of the law, that, quote, to make out my case, end quote, I should rather undervalue than insist upon a full estimation of the activity required in this matter. This may be the practice in law, but it is not the usage of reason. My ultimate object is only the truth. My immediate purpose is to lead you to place in juxtaposition that very unusual activity of which I have just spoken with that very peculiar, shrill, or harsh and unequal voice about whose nationality no two persons could be found to agree, and in whose utterance no syllabification could be detected.
All right, I'll take over here. I got it. At these words, a vague and half-formed conception of the meaning of Dupin fitted over my mind. I seemed to be upon the verge of comprehension. Let's get closer here. Without power to comprehend, as men at times find themselves upon the brink of remembrance, without being able, in the end, to remember. My friend went on with his discourse. You will see, he said, that I have shifted the question from the mode of egress to that of ingress. It was my design to convey the idea that both were effected in the same manner, at the same point. Let us now revert in fancy to the interior of the room. Let us survey the appearances here. The drawers of the bureau, it is said, had been rifled, although many articles of apparel still remained within them. The conclusion here is absurd. It is a mere guess, a very silly one, and no more. How are we to know that the articles found in the drawers were not all these drawers had originally contained? Madame L'Espagnole had an exceedingly retired life, saw no company, seldom went out, had little use for numerous changes of habiliment. Those found were at least of as good quality as any likely to be possessed by these ladies. If a thief had taken any, why did he not take the best? Why did he not take all? In a word, why did he abandon 4,000 francs in gold to encumber himself with a bundle of linen? The gold was abandoned. Nearly the whole sum mentioned by Monsieur Mignon, the banker, was discovered in bags upon the floor. I wish you, therefore, to discard from your thoughts the blundering idea of motive engendered in the brains of the police by that portion of the evidence which speaks of money delivered at the door of the house. Coincidences 10 times as remarkable as this, the delivery of the money and murder committed within 3 days upon the party receiving it, happened to each and all of us every hour of our lives. Without of the money and murder committed without attracting even a monetary notice, Coincidences in general are great stumbling blocks in the way of that class of thinkers who have been educated to know nothing and care less of the theory of probabilities, that theory to which the most glorious objects of human research are indebted for the most glorious of illustration. In the present instance, had the gold been gone, the fact of its delivery 3 days before would have formed something more than a coincidence. It would have been corroborative of this idea of motive. But under the real circumstances of the case, if we are to suppose gold the motive of this outrage, we must also imagine the perpetrator so vacillating an idiot as to have abandoned his gold and his motive together. Keeping now steadily in mind the points to which I have drawn your attention, that peculiar voice, that unusual agility, and that startling absence of motive in a murder so singularly atrocious as this, let us glance at the butchery itself. Here is a woman strangled to death by manual strength and thrust up a chimney, head downward, Ordinary assassins employ no such modes of murder as this. Least of all do they thus dispose of the murdered. In the manner of thrusting the corpse up the chimney, you will admit that there was something excessively outré, something altogether irreconcilable with our common notions of human action, even when we suppose the actors the most depraved of men. Think, too, what must have been the degree of that strength which could have thrust the body up such an aperture so forcibly that the united vigor of several persons was found barely sufficient to drag it down. Turn now to other indications of the employment of a vigor most marvelous. On the hearth were thick tresses, very thick tresses of gray human hair. These had been torn out by the roots. You are aware of the great force necessary in tearing thus from the head even 20 or 30 hairs together? You saw the locks in question as well as myself. Their roots, a hideous sight, were clotted with fragments of flesh of the scalp. Sure, token of the prodigious power which had been exerted in uprooting perhaps 1,000,000 of hairs at a time. The throat of the old lady was not merely cut, but the head absolutely severed from the body. The instrument was a mere razor. Here again we have evidence of the vastness of strength upon which I would affix your attention. I wish you also to look, and to look steadily at the brutal ferocity of these deeds. Of the bruises upon the body of Madame L'Espanaye I do not speak. Monsieur Dumas and his worthy coadjutor, Monsieur Etienne, have pronounced that they were inflicted by some obtuse instrument. And so far these gentlemen are very correct. The obtuse instrument was clearly the stone pavement in the yard, upon which the victim had fallen from the window, which looked in upon the bed. This idea, however simple it may seem now, escaped the police for the same reason that the breadth of the shutters escaped them, because by the affair of the nails their perceptions had been hermetically sealed against the possibility of the windows having ever been opened at all. If now, in addition to all these things, you have properly reflected upon the odd disorder of the chamber, we have gone so far as to combine the ideas of a strength superhuman, an agility astounding, a ferocity brutal, a butchery without motive, a grotesquerie in horror absolutely alien from humanity, and a voice foreign in tone to the ears of men of many nations and devoid of all distinct or intelligible syllabification. What result then has ensued? What impression have I made upon your fancy? You want to
Oh, yeah, sorry.
come? We're getting our second voice in right now. Here we go.
I shuddered as Dupin asked me the question. A madman, I said, has done this deed. Some raving maniac escaped from a neighboring maison de santé.
A madhouse.
Yeah,
In some respects,
he replied.
your idea is not irrelevant, but the voices of madmen, even in their wildest paroxysms, are never found tally with that peculiar voice heard upon the stairs. Madmen are of some nation, and their language, however incoherent in its words, has always the coherence of syllabification. Besides, the hair of a madman is not such hair as I now hold in my hand. I disentangled this little tuft from among the tresses remaining upon the head of Madame L'Espanaye. Tell me what you can make of it.
Good God, I said, completely unnerved. This hair is most unusual. This is no human hair.
I have not asserted that it was,
said he.
But before we decide upon this point, I wish you to glance at the little sketch which I have here traced upon this paper. It is a facsimile drawing of what has been described in one portion of the testimony as dark bruises and deep indentations of fingernails upon the throat of Madame L'Espanaye, and in other words, by Mères Dumas and Etienne, as a series of livid spots, evidently the impression of fingers. You will perceive,
continued my friend, spreading out the paper upon the table before us.
You will perceive that this drawing gives the idea of a firm and fixed hold. There is no slipping apparent. Each finger has retained, possibly until the death of the victim, the fearful grasp by which it originally embedded itself. Attempt now to place all your fingers at one and the same time in the impressions as you see them.
I made the attempt in vain,
We are possibly not giving this matter a fair trial.
he said.
The paper is spread out upon a plane surface, but the human throat is cylindrical. Here is a billet of wood, the circumference of which is that of the bout of the throat. Wrap the drawing around it and try the experiment again.
I did so, but the difficulty was even more obvious than before. This, I said, is the mark of no human hand,
Assuredly it is not.
replied Dupin.
Read now this passage from Cuvier.
It was a minute anatomical and generally descriptive account of the large fulvous orangutan of the East Indian Islands. The gigantic stature, the prodigious strength and activity, the wild ferocity, and the imitative propensities of this mammalia are sufficiently well known to all. I understood the full horrors of the murder at once. The description of the digits, said I, as I made an end of reading, is in exact accordance with this drawing. I see that no animal but an orangutan of the species here mentioned could have impressed the indentations as you have traced them. This tuft of yellow hair is identical in character with that of the beast of the Cuvier, but I cannot possibly comprehend the particulars of this frightful mystery. Besides, there were two voices heard in contention, and one of them was unquestionably the voice of a Frenchman.
True, and you will remember an expression attributed almost unanimously by the evidence to this voice. The expression, mon Dieu. This, under the circumstances, has been justly characterized by one of the witnesses, Montani, the confectioner, as an expression of remonstrance or expostulation. Expostulation. Upon these two words, therefore, I have mainly built my hopes of a full solution of the riddle. A Frenchman was cognizant of the murder. It is possible, indeed it is far more than probable, that he was innocent of all participation in the bloody transactions which took place. The orangutan may have escaped from him. He may have traced it to this chamber, but under the agitating circumstances which ensued, he could never have recaptured it. It is still at large. I will not pursue these guesses, for I have no right to call them more than guesses, since the shades of reflection upon which they are based are scarcely of sufficient depth to be appreciable by my own intellect, and since I could not pretend to make them intelligible to the understanding of another man than myself. We will call them guesses then, and speak of them as such. If the Frenchman in question be indeed, as I suppose, innocent of this atrocity, this advertisement which I left last night upon our return home at the office of Le Monde, a paper devoted to the shipping interest and much sought for by sailors, will bring him to our residence.
He handed me a paper, and I read thus: Caught in the Bois de Boulogne early on the morning of the blank instant, the morning of the murder, a very large, tawny-colored orangutan of the Bornese species. The owner, who was ascertained to be a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, may have the animal again upon identifying it satisfactorily and paying a few charges arising from its capture and keeping. Call at number Rue Faubourg Saint-Germain, au troisième, fourth floor. How was it possible, I asked, that you should know the man to be a sailor and belonging to a Maltese vessel?
I do not know it,
said Dupin.
I am not sure of it. Here, however, is a small piece of ribbon which has evidently from its form and from its greasy appearance been used in the tying the hair in one of those long queues of which sailors are so fond. Moreover, this knot is one which few besides sailors can tie and is peculiar to the Maltese. I picked the ribbon up at the foot of the lightning rod. It could not have belonged to either of the deceased. Now, if, after all, I am wrong in my induction from this ribbon that the Frenchman was a sailor belonging to a Maltese vessel, still I can have done no harm in stating what I did in the advertisement. If I am in error, he will merely suppose that I have been misled by some circumstance into which he will not take the trouble to inquire. But if I am right, a great point is gained. Cognizant of the murder, although not guilty, the Frenchman will naturally hesitate about replying to the advertisement, about demanding the orangutan. He will reason thus: I am innocent, I am poor, my orangutan is of great value. To one in my circumstances, a fortune of itself. Why should I lose it through idle apprehensions of danger? Here it is within my grasp. It was found in the Bois du Bouillon, at a vast distance from the scene of that butchery. How can it ever be suspected that a brute beast should have done the deed? The police are at fault. They have failed to procure the slightest clue, should they even trace the animal. It would be impossible to prove me cognizant of the murder, or to implicate me in guilt on account of that cognizance. Above all, I am known. The advertiser designates me as the possessor of the beast. I am not sure to what limit his knowledge may extend. Should I avoid claiming a property of so great a value which it is known that I possess, I will render the animal at least liable to suspicion. It is not my policy to attract attention either to myself or to the beast. I will answer the advertisement, get the orangutan, and keep it close until this matter has blown over.
At this moment, we heard a step upon the stairs.
Be ready,
said Dupin,
with your pistols, but neither show them nor use them until at a signal from myself.
The front door of the house had been left open, and the visitor had entered without ringing or rapping, and advanced several steps upon the staircase. Now, however, he seemed to hesitate. Presently, we heard him descending. Dupin was moving quickly to the door when we again heard him coming up. He did not turn back a second time, but stepped up quickly and rapped at the door of our chamber.
Come in,
said Dupin, in a cheerful and hearty tone. The visitor entered. He was a sailor, evidently, a tall, stout, and muscular-looking man, with a certain daredevil expression of countenance, not altogether unprepossessing. His face, greatly sunburnt, was more than half hidden by a world of whisker and mustachio. He had with him a huge oaken cudgel, but appeared to be otherwise unarmed. He bowed awkwardly and bade us good evening in French accents, which, although somewhat Neufchatelish, were still sufficiently indicative of a Parisian origin.
Sit down, my friend,
said Dupin.
I suppose you have called about the orangutan. Upon my word, I almost envy you the possession of him. A remarkably fine and no doubt a very valuable animal. How old do you suppose him to be?
The sailor drew a long breath, with the air of a man relieved of some intolerable burden, and then replied in an assured tone, I guess we need another reader.
Just do it.
Go ahead.
I have no way of telling, but he can't be more than 4 or 5 years old. Have you got him here?
Oh, no. We had no conveniences for keeping him here. He is at a livery stable in Rue du Bourg, just by. You can get him in the morning. Of course, you are prepared to identify the property?
Be sure I am, sir.
I shall be sorry to part with him.
I don't mean you should be at all this trouble for nothing, sir,
said the man.
Couldn't expect that. Am very willing to pay a reward for the finding of the animal. That is to say, any reward in reason.
Well,
replied my friend,
that is all very fair, to be sure. Let me think. What reward ought I to have? Oh, I will tell you. My reward shall be this. You shall give me all the information in your power about the affair of the murder in the Rue Morgue.
Dupin said these last words in a very low tone and very quietly. Just as quietly, too, he walked towards the door, locked it, and put the key in his pocket. He then drew a pistol from his bosom and placed it, without the least flurry, upon the table.
Oh, wow.
The sailor's face flushed up with an ungovernable tide of crimson. He started to his feet and grasped his cudgel, but the next moment he fell back into his seat, trembling convulsively, and with the countenance of death itself. He spoke not a single word. I pitied him from the bottom of my heart.
My friend,
said Dupin in a kind tone,
you are alarming yourself unnecessarily. You are indeed. We mean you no harm whatever. I pledge you the honor of a gentleman and of a Frenchman that we intend you no injury. I perfectly well know that you are innocent of the atrocities in the Rue Morgue. It will not do, however, to deny that you are in some measure implicated in them. From what I have already said, you must know that I have had means of information about this matter, means of which you could never have dreamed. Now the thing stands thus. You have done nothing which you could have avoided. Nothing certainly renders you culpable. You were not even guilty of robbery when you might have robbed with impunity. You have nothing to conceal. You have no reason for concealment. On the other hand, you are bound by every principle of honor to confess all you know. An innocent man is now imprisoned, charged with that crime of which you can point out the perpetrator.
The sailor had recovered his presence of mind in a great measure while Dupin uttered these words, but his original boldness of bearing was all gone.
So help me God,
Said he, after a brief pause.
I will tell you all that I know about this affair, but I do not expect you to believe one half that I say. I would be a fool indeed if I did. Still, I am innocent, and I will make a clean breast if I die for it.
I do not propose to follow the man in the circumstantial narrative which he had now detailed. What he stated was, in substance, this. He had lately made a voyage to the Indian archipelago. A party, of which he formed one, landed at Borneo and passed into the interior on an excursion of pleasure. Himself and a companion had captured the orangutan. This companion dying, the animal fell into his own exclusive possession. After great trouble, occasioned by the intractable ferocity of his capture during the home voyage, he at length succeeded in lodging it safely at his own residence in Paris, where, not to attract towards himself the unpleasant curiosity of his neighbors, he kept it carefully secluded until such time as it should recover from a wound in the foot, received from a splinter on board ship. His ultimate design was to sell it. Returning home from some sailor's frolic on the night, or rather in the morning of the murder, he found his prisoner occupying his own bedroom, into which he had broken from a closet adjoining, where he had been, as it was thought, securely confined. The beast, razor in hand and fully lathered, was sitting before a looking-glass, attempting the operation of shaving, in which he had no doubt previously watched his master through the keyhole of the closet. Terrified at the sight of so dangerous a weapon in the possession of an animal so ferocious and so well able to use it, the man, for some moments, was at a loss what to do. He had been accustomed, however, to quiet the creature, even in its fiercest moods, by the use of a strong wagoner's whip, and to this he now resorted. Upon sight of it, the orangutan sprang at once through the door of the chamber, down the stairs, and thence through a window, unfortunately open, into the street. The Frenchman followed in despair, the ape, razor still in hand, occasionally stopping to look back and gesticulate at his pursuer until the latter had nearly come up with him. He then again made off. In this manner, the chase continued for a long time. The streets were profoundly quiet, as it was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. And passing down an alley in the rear of the Rue Morgue, the fugitive's attention was arrested by a light, the only one apparent except those of the town lamps, gleaming from the open window of Madame L'Espagnier's chamber in the 4th story of her house. Rushing to the building, he perceived the lightning rod, clambered up with inconceivable agility, grasped the shutter, which was fully thrown back against the wall, and, by its means, swung himself directly upon the headboard of the bed. The whole feat did not occupy a minute. The shutter was kicked open again by the orangutan as he entered the room. The sailor, in the meantime, was both rejoiced and perplexed. He had strong hopes of now recapturing the ape, as it could scarcely escape from the trap into which it had ventured, except by the rod, where it might be intercepted as it came down. On the other hand, there was much cause for anxiety as to what the brute might do in the house. This latter reflection urged the man still to follow the fugitive. A lightning rod is ascended without difficulty, especially by a sailor, but when he had arrived as high as the window, which lay far to his left, his career was stopped. The most that he could accomplish was to reach over so as to obtain a glimpse of the interior of the room. At this glimpse, he nearly fell from his hole through excess of horror. Now it was that those hideous shrieks arose upon the night, which had startled from slumber the inmates of the Rue Morgue. Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter, habited in her night clothes, had apparently been occupied in arranging some papers in the iron chest already mentioned, which had been wheeled into the middle of the room. It was open, and its contents lay beside it on the floor. Their backs must have been towards the window, and by the time elapsing between the screams and the ingress of the ape, it seems probable that he was not immediately perceived. The flapping to of the shutter they would naturally have attributed to the wind. As the sailor looked in, the gigantic beast had seized Madame L'Espanaye by the hair, which was loose as she had been combing it, and was flourishing the razor about her face in imitation of the motions of a barber. The daughter
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The daughter lay prostrate and motionless. She had swooned. The screams and struggles of the old lady, during which the hair was torn from her head, had the effect of changing the probably pacific purposes of the orangutan into those of ungovernable wrath. With one determined sweep of his muscular arm, he nearly severed her head from her body. The sight of blood inflamed his anger into frenzy. Gnashing his teeth and flashing fire from his eyes, he flew upon the body of the girl and embedded his fearful talons into her throat, retaining his grasp until she expired. His wandering and wild glances fell at this moment upon the head of the bed, over which those of his master, glazed in horror, were just discernible. The fury of the beast, who no doubt bore still in mind the dreaded whip, was instantly converted into dread. Conscious of having deserved punishment, he seemed desirous to conceal his bloody deeds, and skipped about the chamber in an apparent agony of nervous agitation, throwing down and breaking the furniture as he moved, and dragged the bed from the bedstead. In conclusion, he seized first the corpse of the daughter and thrust it up the chimney as it was found, then that of the old lady, with which he rushed to the window, precipitating it immediately therefrom. As the ape approached him with his mutilated burden, the sailor shrunk aghast to the rod, and, rather gliding than clambering down it, hurried at once home, dreading the consequences of the butchery, and gladly abandoning, in his terror, all solicitude about the fate of the orangutan. The words heard by the party upon the staircase were the Frenchman's exclamations of horror and affright, commingled with the fiendish jabberings of the brute. I have scarcely anything to add. The orangutan must have escaped from the chamber by the rod just before the breaking of the door. He must have closed the window as he passed through it. He was subsequently caught by the owner himself, who obtained for him a very large sum at the Jardin des Plantes. Le Bon was instantly released, upon our narration of the circumstances, with some comments from Dupin, at the bureau of the Prefect de Police. This functionary, however well disposed to my friend, could not altogether conceal his chagrin at the turn which affairs had taken, and was fain to indulge in a sarcasm or two in regard to the propriety of every person minding his own business.
Let him talk,
said Dupin, who had not thought it necessary to reply.
Let him discourse. It will ease his conscience. I am satisfied with having defeated him in his own castle. In truth, he is too cunning to be acute. There is no stamina in his wisdom. It is all head and no body, like the pictures of the goddess Laverna, or at least all head and shoulders, like a codfish. But he is a good fellow after all. I like him, especially for one master stroke of cant, by which he has attained that reputation for ingenuity which he possesses. I mean the way he has de nier ce qui est et d'expliquer ce qui n'est pas.
of denying what is and of explaining what is not.
What happened with the? They caught it, and then he sold it. They didn't.
No, I don't think they ever found the orangutan.
They didn't buy the orangutan.
No, it was a fake ad they put in the paper to draw him in.
Oh, but I see. But so
Well,
they
it
still-
says he was subsequently caught by the owner himself, who
yeah.
obtained from him a very large sum at the Jardin des Plantes.
So yeah, that's so they did catch him.
Oh yeah, you're
They
right.
sold him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Mm.
And he sold it. Yeah.
Yeah, because Dupin cleared him.
Yeah, right.
Mm.
And that is how the detective story was invented.
All based on the whist.
Wow.
There's more that could be said, but I think what would be useful for people to do, and maybe we could do just a few sentences, is to now think about why that story begins the way it begins. Why does the story say, right? What song the sirens sang? You know, we know Ulysses and the song of the sirens, which causes him to go crazy. They have to lash him to the mast, otherwise he'll jump into the ocean.
Yeah.
What song the sirens sang, or what name Achilles assumed when he hid himself among women, although puzzling questions are not beyond all conjecture. And then he goes through this whole thing about analysis. We read the first paragraph before. You might say here, it cannot be doubted that the mental features discoursed of as the analytical are themselves but little susceptible of analysis. We appreciate them only in their effects. We know of them, among other things, that they are always to their possessor, when inordinately possessed, a source of the liveliest enjoyment. As the strong man exalts in his physical ability, delighting in such exercises as call his muscles into action, so glories the analyst in that moral activity which disentangles. He derives pleasure from even the most trivial occupations, bringing his talent into play. He is fond of enigmas, of conundrums, of hieroglyphics, exhibiting in his solutions of each and all a degree of acumen which appears to the ordinary apprehension preternatural. His results, brought about by the very soul and ethics of method, have in truth the whole air of intuition. And then he says a few other things. He says, the faculty in question is possibly much invigorated by mathematical study, and especially by that highest branch of it, which unjustly and merely on account of its retrograde operations has been called, as if par excellence, analysis. Now, this refers to a very specific field. We're not going to discuss it now, which is called analysis cetus. This is something that Gottfried Leibniz had developed, and it is something that was well studied in France in the period in which Poe is writing, and had been studied earlier in France, for that matter, and is the work of the École Polytechnique, people like Gaspard Monge, also Carnot, and then some later scientists, including people like Galois and others. It's a very specific thing he's referring to. We don't have time tonight, of course, to talk about it, but that's what is referenced here by Poe. Okay, so I don't know if there are any questions. I hope people enjoyed it. I hope people stay with us on the reading side. How's that look, Jose? People still with us?
I don't know. It says there's people still connected. We'll see. They haven't commented. Maybe some of them fell asleep.
No, I don't think so.
They must be having wild dreams. Okay.
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 Yeah. This was. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll end it here. votevega.nyc if you want to donate, if you want to check out some of our projects on the Cross Bronx Expressway and the like, to be a part of the conversation, whether it's on the PO or anything else we're doing, or to volunteer, and most importantly as well, contribute right now to, we're coming up at a critical point and juncture where we're getting ready to petition. So we're going to need your help, your funds, and your support. So please feel free to donate and visit votevega.nyc. And with that, we are out.